Welcome to everyone for today's edition of the lunchtime lecture at the Athenaeum in Philadelphia. My name is Bruce Laverty. I'm the curator of architecture, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. That is Michael J. Seneca, who is the director of the Regional Digital Imaging Center here at the Athenaeum of Philadelphia. Mike, I'm sure has a long list of thank yous that he's going to cover in his talk, but I'm sure that one person that is not on his list is Mike Seneca. So I will take this opportunity right now to thank him for his contribution to the Athenaeum over the last 21 years, and in particular for his guiding this enormous project of scanning 50,000 plus pages of never before available material for the world. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Mike.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Let me try to share my screen. So I'm going to start with a PowerPoint, and then we'll go to the website. I first wanted to show how, or what sorts of information you can find in the Builder's Guide. And so here we have a few entries for buildings, and these usually take up the first 3 or 4 pages of the Builder's Guide. And well, first I should say the Builder's Guide was a periodical that was published weekly from 1886 to 1940. And what they did was they published news about the Philadelphia building industry, notes about architects, contractors, developers, anything that was being built in the city and around the city. So here we have some typical building notes. Here's a building that's being altered in a garage at 1122, 24, 26 William-Ensing Avenue. Here's a hotel on the east side of Broad Street, south of the Locust. And here's a church at 10th and Wallace Streets. So you can see right away that if you're looking for a particular building and you have the address, typing the address into the search on our website, you may get lucky and you may find the building you're looking for, but don't get disappointed if you don't, because most of the entries in the Builder's Guide are more vague and are not exact addresses. Even this one, the building and garage, if you searched for 1124 Moya-Mensing, you probably wouldn't find this. So these are the type of notes that you'll find in the Builder's Guide. And sometimes they come under different headings. First, we have advanced construction news, building and real estate notes, architects notes. You'll also see contracts awarded, alterations and additions. For areas outside of Philadelphia, it might say through Pennsylvania, through New Jersey, and they'll all be similar notes to this, where you see S. Elvin Jackson, architect, has plans for the erection of a house for W.K. Mitchell, Ridley Park, PA. And so now at this point, he has completed the plans. There might be another note a few months later when a contractor is hired or when the building's completed. It really varies. Some buildings get a lot of entries, some buildings get one mention, and that's it. And so I picked the building by my favorite Philadelphia architect, Willis G. Hale. This is for the Lorraine Hotel, and this is the first mention of the Lorraine in 1892. And you can see it got a very long first mention, almost a full column. And it starts out by saying that the Lincoln Market and Hall at Broad and Fairmount has been sold, and it talks about erecting an apartment house on the site. And it says that the new building will be built next summer and will be ready for occupancy next fall. Mr. Hale has the plans already drawn. So that's the first mention of the Lorraine Hotel. A few months later in March, we see that the hotel has gained investors. It says Willis G. Hale, architect, who heads the syndicate, will be started at an early day as the stock has been largely taken. Full description of this work has already been given. in the journal. In June, we see that the Lincoln Market is being demolished. In July, the plans pass inspection. And I like this one because it says, shows how words were used a little differently in the 19th century. It says, for the safety of the inmates, iron balconies surround the building at each floor on 3 sides and 14 ladders lead down, affording means of escape in case of fire. Today, we would not refer to apartment guests or hotel guests as inmates. In August, we see that the contract has been awarded to George F. Payne and Company, and that the brickwork is going to be done by Michael McGee. August 16th, the excavation has begun. August 30th, the permit was obtained by the contractor. And finally, December 6th, 1893, says that the Lorraine apartment is being pushed with much vigor and is now approaching the 4th and 5th floors. So in about 1 year, we've seen 7 or 8 entries for the Lorraine Hotel, from just being an idea to being up to the 5th floor construction. And so that's the kind of documentation that you can find in the Builder's Guide. You can trace a building, through its entire building history. And so those are the building notes, and I think that's what most people use the Builder's Guide for. They're either looking for who the architect of a particular building was, or who the owner of a particular building was, or who the contractors were. In this case, we found out a pretty obscure fact that Michael McGee was the bricklayer for this building. There are other things in the Builder's Guide, like articles. Thousands and thousands of articles on all different building subjects. This one is about trucks replacing horses, and describes all of the problems of keeping horses and feeding them, and how it's much easier to just have a truck. At the beginning of each year, the Builder's Guide would lay out statistics of what was done the previous year, or what was built in the city. And you can see that they have building types in the one column, and then how many of that particular building type was built in the city. So if you want to know how many gymnasiums were built in Philadelphia in 1926, you can see that there were 2. And this one, I picked this one just by chance, but 1926 actually lists down on the left-hand column, it lists sesquicentennial as a building type. And it notes that there were 247 buildings built for the sesquicentennial that year. The Builder's Guide loved to sell advertising, and they would often have little notes about how important advertising was, or how important hard work was. And you would find these little funny quotes or life lessons. This one is, the man that doesn't advertise nowadays is a barnacle, and he ends up like a barnacle by being scraped off. It's from 1911. And in 1914, they said, many a man would do a better job if he didn't know about putty. And I wish that I had taken better notes on all of the funny things I had seen in the Builder's Guide as I scanned it, but there were just too many. There was lots of advertising in the Builder's Guide. This one I particularly like, for USG sheetrock. It won't burn. Don't try this at home. And here's an ad for a unique contractor in Philadelphia, Captain John J. Williams. That must be him on the right. And here's an ad for the Van Sciver Company. They had a series of ads in the 20s where they would show a building that they had just worked on or were working on. And then they would show a little vignette of what was there previously. And so the Builder's Guide didn't really publish a lot of images as just part of their practice, but there are lots of images of buildings in the advertising. And that's mostly where pictures show up. Here's another one that shows the Penn Mutual building on the corner of 6th and Walnut. This is probably the only image of the Athenaeum in the Builder's Guide, but it's obscured by a tree over here on Washington Square. And that's all for the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go to the website now. So on the front page of the Builder's Guide website, you can browse through any year or just search within a year, or you can do a full search of all the years. So just to show you how the search works, yesterday I tried typing in, I looked for Paul Cray and his Pan American Union building, and I typed Cray, Pan American, and I just searched. And so you can see it brings up some results. Pan American with a hyphen shows up, and this is the project I was looking for. But you'll also see down here it will find Pan American without the hyphen. It will find Pan American with an equal sign. So although the OCR of the Builder's Guide is not perfect, and sometimes it would have inserted an equals instead of a hyphen, the search still finds it. It's pretty forgiving. And on the help page here, we have different ways of searching. You can just type two names or two keywords. You can add a plus sign so that it requires that the second word be on the page. It won't show you results, any other results. And there's some other things here like wildcards. Mostly, I've been using the plus sign because I think that gives better results than just not using it. And I'll show you an example of that. So I searched for Union League and Horace Trumbauer. So the search results here are good. It's showing the addition to the Union League by Trumbauer. But I noticed that when I get down to about the 12th result, or now it's not coming up. I must have done something different than I did yesterday. Maybe I put the words in a different order. But anyway, by the 12th result, I started getting results that dealt with unions and leagues, and that wasn't what I was looking for. So I found that by adding the plus sign, Union League plus Trumbauer, oh, here we go. So result 6, we start getting Iron League, non-union men. But I found that if I add the plus sign, that tends not to happen. So you can see now the results are, well, it's proving me wrong. It's not doing what it did yesterday. But I definitely think that adding the plus sign will minimize the amount of sort of results that don't deal with what you're looking for. And I don't know why it's different. I must have typed the words in a different order. So if we actually go to one of these results, you can see that the page comes up in this viewer. And it's also showing me all my other results on a timeline. So each one of these little blue pins is showing me another instance. And you can zoom in on the page. Let me. And this is actually one building that they did illustrate. And so if I go back to the home page, let me. You can see that there's a search box here under the image. And this box just searches within the year. So if I want to type furnace. So now it's showing me all the 55 appearances of Frank Furnace in 1897. And again, they're shown on the timeline, and the OCR transcription of the page appears down here at the bottom. And this is the text that's being searched when you type into the search field. And you will see errors in there because, like I said, the OCR isn't perfect. You can see there's a misspelled word here. But mostly the misspellings come in the advertising where there's a lot of fancy fonts and things like that. So I think that's all I have. I don't know if there are any questions about searching. Maybe you've tried to search and you have some questions. Oh, I see in the questions and answers, there's a question about putting quotes around words to find the exact phrase. And that does not work because the search tool that was used for this website doesn't have an exact search function. And part of the reason for that is that with OCR, since the OCR is not exact, by typing an exact phrase, you're less likely to find what you're looking for because there could be a slight misspelling in the OCR or something else that would cause the exact phrase not to come up. So this search field is more forgiving and will give you more results than you probably need based on all of the possible misspellings and things that look like or sound like what you're looking for. If the address of a building is not mentioned, how do you find the location? What I normally do, you have to have some information to get started in the builder's guide. So you either have to have, the name of the original owner or the architect or the year it was built. Usually the address is not going to be helpful, as I mentioned. So what I normally do is, if I'm looking for a house that was built in a particular place, I have at least one or two pieces of information already. So I know that I can just search within a particular year and maybe search for the architect name and then go through all those results and see if I can find the project I'm looking for. Or maybe I have the year and the owner and I want to find out who the architect is. I can search that way. But you're probably not going to find a building or a house if you just have the address. You need to do some other research and find some other pieces of information to search for in here, and then this might help you fill out the story. Will you allow volunteers to correct the OCR? That is something we're going to have to consider. I know that right now, the way the site is built, it's not possible, but maybe it could be possible. We'll have to look at that. Is the digital record of the Builder's Guide complete for all years of publication. As far as I know, what we've put online is the complete Builder's Guide for all years of publication. You will see that in the 30s and maybe the 1940 year, there are weeks that were skipped. And I don't think that's because they're missing. I think it's because they just didn't publish. During the Depression in the early 30s, there were periods where the Builder's Guide, I think, just didn't publish at all. And so that's why you'll see some missing weeks and months. Are the articles influenced or sponsored financially by the building developers? Yes, I believe so. We think that the way that the Builder's Guide was compiled wasn't through reporting, but was through the architects and the contractors submitting information of what they were doing every week. So maybe they weren't paying. They were paying for advertising, but they weren't necessarily paying for all those little building notes. They were just submitting the information, and then the Builder's Guide would publish it. Can you demonstrate a downloading of images? I can. Let's go to an image. So to download this page, all you have to do is click this little download button over here. And it gives you a high-res image. You just hit download. There's the page. And if I right-click on it and just save the image, it will save. What is the content outside of Philadelphia? The content outside of Philadelphia is actually pretty good. They did cover New Jersey and Maryland and the rest of Pennsylvania. There's definitely going to be more content for Philadelphia, but they certainly didn't ignore all those other areas. And I think even there might even be things for Washington, D.C. and New York at sometimes. Will queries return advertisements of builders and suppliers? It will if the OCR recognize the text. And that's, you know, a lot of advertisements use fancy text. And so if the OCR is not correct, then it's not going to come up until the OCR gets corrected. And right now we have no plans to go through and actually correct all of the OCR because there's over 46,000 pages and it took about 10 years to get the scans online. It would probably take another 10 or 15 just to correct the OCR, unless people did it as volunteers. I see a question about Athenaeum. Reproductions at the Athenaeum usually have a charge. What is the policy for this? This is totally free. The entire Builder's Guide is online for free, and you can download the images at no cost. Can the user frame the text they want to download? No, you have to download the whole page right now. One thing I didn't mention is that when you actually search and your search results come up and you go to a particular page, the search results are highlighted on the page in blue. So you will be able to find what you're looking for on the page pretty quickly. Can I make the image full screen? Yes, I believe you can. I'm on a little laptop here, so the images look tiny, but you can make that window that displays the images larger than what you're seeing on my screen here. Is it possible to add the quotes function? No, I actually asked our technical consultant who built this site about that, and he said that the search function that's being used on the site it's not possible to add an exact search. I think that's a component. It's not a component that we built. It's a component that we're using or that we acquired. There's a question about the contents of the builder's guide changing over time. It's hard to say. I think you see the same things, but maybe you do see more of one thing than another. And also, I think there were years where the builder's guide was 28 pages long, and there were other years where it was maybe 12 pages long. So I think it just depended on what was happening and how much work there was, how much development there was over that decided how the content changed. Okay, I think I answered most of the questions here.
There are a few questions in the chat too. If you could explain a little bit more about what OCR means and how it works.
OCR is optical character recognition. So we scan the pages. The pages were run through software that recognizes the text. So all the text transcription that you see at the bottom was not transcribed by a person, it was transcribed by software. And so the quality of that text that you see at the bottom, or the text that's being searched, is dependent on how good that software was at reading the text. And that's why I say that the normal text that appears in the builder's guide columns, the information is generally pretty good because the software was able to read that. But once you get into advertising and creative use of fonts and things, then the OCR is not as good, and it just sees an image rather than text.
Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I just wanted to mention in terms of that with the advertising, in the ads, it was not unusual, even in a small ad, for there to be a dozen or more different typefaces. And the news articles were fairly uniform, and so the software could read those pretty easily. But you have to remember that Philadelphia was a printing and an advertising center, and what they did was had lots and lots of flourishes with the typeface in the ads in order to attract more eyes. They hadn't considered the issue of OCR in 1886 or even in 1940. So it's a challenge, but that's one of the problems. It's not a standard text size. The other thing that I wanted to mention in terms of two more thank yous is where the builder's guide came from. The copy that the Athenaeum has had been rescued by George E. Thomas, and he and his outfit, the Clio Group, used it to create some of their early computerized databases of Philadelphia architecture in a very rough and tumble way in terms of the technology of the day. And George gave his collection. It's the only surviving original copy of the Builder's Guide. He gave this to the Athenaeum in the year 2000, and it was approximately 10 years before we had the capability to even begin to scan it. So there was a certain institutional capacity that the Athenaeum had to catch up with before this incredibly important data set would become available. And it was made possible, that final sort of push over the finish line was made possible through a grant from the Christopher Lindback foundation.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, let me just double check.
There's a question about the order of words, about the order that the words are put in. Yeah, I definitely typed those words yesterday in a different order. And it's not that the results are different, it's that the order of the results are different. So it may prioritize the first word over the second words. But that's why I like the plus sign. And if you go to the help page on the website, you'll see explanations of what those extra characters do in the search, like the plus sign and the tilde and the question mark. Might help you to find results if you're having trouble.
I can just add also that in terms of the coverage outside of Philadelphia, it did extend as far west as Chicago. There was extensive coverage of the 1893 World's Columbian Exhibition. But then there were also builders' guides that were printed in other cities, in New York and Toronto in particular, that I remember off the top of my head, but I would say there were probably about a dozen or so cities in the United States and Canada where this was printed, and it was the same kind of format. This was a tool for the building industries, for them to find out what was on the boards, what was in the works, and what jobs would be available, and a way to crow about what had happened once it had all come to completion.
And there is a link to the New York Builders Guide on our About page on our site. So.
They beat us to the scanning by about a year.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. If you have any other questions, you can find Mike's contact info on our website, and that's where you can also find the link to the Builder's Guide if you haven't looked at it yet.
Okay, thank you.